Today we're going to be teaching you how to ride a motorcycle. So the first step we're going to do before we even get on the bike is learn what the different parts of the bike do. Now, pretty much every bike is pretty much the same as far as the controls go. So if you have any experience riding a bicycle, this is probably like a brake, and this is probably like your rear brake or something. But on a motorcycle, this is actually going to be your clutch, and this is going to be your front brake, and your rear brake is going to be operated by your right foot. Over here on the left side, you're going to have your shifter. In order to shift through the gears, it's going to be first gear is down, half a click up is neutral, and then up, 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 all the way to like 6th gear. So your basic controls to start the bike, you have your ignition, you have your kill switch or on-off switch, and your starter button. A lot of newer bikes have this integrated to where it's just one big switch that you can click up to kill it or hold and pull down to start it. And then depending on your bike, you're going to have different controls here. Your high beams, your low beams, your turn signals, your horn. If you have different modes, traction controls, stuff like that if you have a newer bike. This is very bare bones, basic. Headlight controls, turn signals, horn, starting. Alright, so before we even get on the bike, no matter what bike you have, try and just pick it up off the kickstand. Chances are, it's probably going to be heavier than you expected if you've never picked up a motorcycle or been around motorcycles before. You can just stand next to the bike, kind of lean it back and forth, feel when it's at its perfect balance point on flat ground, it's basically weightless. You don't have to hold it up or anything. Sit on the bike and walk it around a little bit, get a feel for the weight of it, how it turns. Or you can walk next to it, make sure it's in neutral, push it around, get a feel for it. I think this is actually a pretty important step that a lot of like beginner people might miss out on, is to get a feel for the bike. Because if you're first time on a motorcycle, you're sitting on it, you're running it, and you're trying to take off on it, it can be a little bit overwhelming. You don't know how it feels to lean it over, how to turn at slow speeds. So just getting on the bike in neutral and walking it, feeling it, tilting it a little bit, it can do a lot for you just to understand how the bike feels. Even if you're very slow walking the bike and you grab the front brake hard, you can drop the bike. Especially if your bars are turned and you pull on the front brake, the suspension is going to want to compress in the direction that the wheel is turned. So your wheel is turned, you grab too much front brake. Even walking your bike, you can do this. All of the weight shifts forward, and not just straight forward, but forward and to the side, and then that's how you drop the bike. Now that you've got a feel for the bike, let's get on it. So you're going to want to get the bike off the kickstand, get your feet down, and make sure your kickstand is up before you start the bike. The first thing you do when you take the bike off the kickstand should be to put the kickstand up. This will prevent you from any embarrassing moments of stalling it when your kickstand's down. Most bikes will have a safety where it won't allow you to put the bike in gear while the kickstand is down. So let's turn on the ignition, and you'll see the display should light up. There will usually be a green N, or if you have an LCD display, there will be an N somewhere that means neutral. Make sure your bike is in neutral. So we'll flip the key, hit the switch, make sure we're in neutral, and hold the start button until it starts. Now this is where it gets kind of hard if you've never ridden anything with a clutch before. Hold in the clutch all the way and click your foot down. That should be in the first gear. You'll know you're in first gear, the bike might jolt or click, and your neutral light will go out. If you have a gear indicator, it'll say first. So now, to get the bike moving, we're going to have to slowly let out the clutch, and you'll feel. Just go with the bike. Slowly let out the clutch, very slowly, and you'll feel it start to roll. And just walk the bike like that for a little bit. Very slowly, have both feet on the ground, walk the bike, and just keep the clutch out. Don't let it out all the way yet. Just barely keep it out until it starts moving. And if you can see, now I have both feet up and my clutch isn't even fully out yet. This is the friction zone. And you can see if I pull in the clutch, I'm just coasting right now. You can't tell because I'm kind of going down a hill. But if I pull in the clutch, I'm gonna start slowing down. It's basically like putting it in neutral. And then if I slowly let the clutch back out, I'll go. So I would practice this a couple times. Use your front and rear brake at the same time, very gently. Pull in your clutch, come to a stop, and then do the same thing. Slowly let out your clutch. Take as much time as you want. You're not at a stop sign or a red light or anything. You don't need to hurry. Slowly let it out. And then eventually you can let it out all the way. No clutch, no throttle, and I'm just rolling. It's basically the equivalent of if you are in a car and you put it into first gear or even in drive at an automatic, and then you just take your foot off the brake. It'll roll by itself. So I recommend to practice that over and over and over again, because that's going to be probably one of the hardest things to do on a motorcycle as you're starting out, is learning the friction zone and how to not stall it. I actually have another video that gives you some tips on how not to stall it and make it just a little bit easier to get it right every single time. So try and find like a nice open area. School parking lot on a weekend is usually a safe bet. But you have to make sure, remember this, if you're going to be coming to a stop, you have to pull in your clutch. If you start slowing down too much without your clutch pulled in, you will hear your engine start to bog down and rattle and not sound good, and then it'll stall. So if you're coming to a stop, always make sure have your clutch pulled in all the way. Now if you want to tip to take off a little bit faster, give it a little bit of throttle while you're letting the clutch out. So you're going to want to slowly start letting the clutch out, and once the bike starts to roll, give it a tiny bit of throttle, and then that will allow you to keep the revs up higher and allow you to let the clutch out a tiny bit faster. I don't know if you saw that or not, but my hand barely moved. I am on a 600cc sport bike. Depending on what bike you're on, you might have to give it more or less throttle, but always start off with less. The worst thing that can happen if you don't give it enough throttle is you stall. Boo-hoo. Worst thing that can happen if you give it too much throttle is you whiskey throttle it and end up in a building or something. So if you're very careful and conservative with all of your controls and all of your movements, you'll have no issues. So at this point, whether you're staying in your friction zone or if you're off the clutch completely and you're just coasting around, practice some turns, because that's honestly really important. It's an important part that most people miss. They figure like, okay, once they're riding on a street, you don't need to make too many sharp turns on a street. But practicing in a parking lot is really good, especially if you have like parking lines. You can set a goal for yourself on turning within a certain radius of the parking line. So like start off at like, try and do a U-turn within 5 parking spaces, then 4, you know, and then work it down. You'll notice at super slow speeds, it'll be just how you think it is. If you turn your bars to the right and tilt the bike to the right, you'll go right. If you turn your bars to the left, you'll go left. 15 miles an hour is kind of like the in-between stage. So over like 15 miles an hour, you're going to be doing something called counter steering, which sounds confusing as hell. Turn right to go left or whatever, but it's really not. And if you go into it with that mindset of having to think about turning right to go left, it might seem confusing. In my personal experience and other people that I've talked to, It's kind of like second nature. If you've ever ridden like a bicycle at any sort of decent speed, you've probably countersphered before. You don't need to actively think about it. Like, it's not like, okay, I gotta look at my speedometer, make sure I'm over the speed limit. Okay, now I know I have to turn the opposite way. No, it comes second nature almost. See right here? If I push on my right handlebar forward, which you'd think would turn the wheel left, it actually makes me go right, and it does. It turns the wheel left, which makes the bike want to fall to the right, which the gyroscopic force makes the bike turn right. That's the short of it. That's the way I understand it anyway. I could be talking out of my ass. Now, you've been riding around in first gear, you've been playing around with the friction zone, you've been practicing your stopping and going. Now let's go a little bit faster and try and change gears. This is very easy. So before we start shifting, we're just going to get a feel for the throttle. So get on a nice straight area of your parking lot and twist the throttle a little bit. Now, if you're anything like me, my first time at the MSF course, I was on a little Honda Rebel, I think 250, maybe even like a 150 or something, 125, I don't know. It was a very small bike. But this was my first time on a motorcycle. Haven't ridden dirt bikes or anything like that. And it shocked me how powerful that little Honda Rebel felt. So a good maneuver to practice is accelerating and then pulling in your clutch and using your front and rear brake at the same time to come to a stop. Slowly squeeze it and not grab it. It's called progressive braking. You're going to start out to where you just barely remove the slop from your front brake, and then you'll feel it start to engage. And as you start slowing down, progressively squeeze harder and harder and harder. Start off squeezing slowly, and then slowly start squeezing harder as you brake. You don't want to do any sudden movements with the brake. You don't want to just give it a little. So now let's get into second gear. So what we're going to do to shift gears, roll off the throttle, pull in the clutch, click up on your foot, slowly let out the throttle, and get back on the gas. So now we're in second gear. What do? Well, what you can do is just pull in the clutch and come to a stop, and while you're stopping, click it down in the first gear. You can come to a stop in any gear if you need to. As long as your clutch is pulled in, it won't matter, you won't stall. You just have to remember before you take off to click it all the way back down in the first gear. But that's not ideal. It's okay to stop in second gear. A lot of times I do stop in second gear and then just click it down into first. You're going to want to be able to downshift when coming to a stop sometimes. So that way you're always in a decent gear. So you always kind of want to stay in the right gear for your speed that you're going. And in order to do that, you'll have to downshift when coming to a stop. So the easiest way to downshift is to basically just do the same thing as you do when you upshift. So you're in second gear cruising. I'm going to roll off the throttle, pull in the clutch, click it down, and then slowly let out the clutch. You especially want to be slow when you're going down a gear. Now, a more advanced technique would be rev matching. And rev matching is nice because it can be done a lot faster than just slowly letting out the clutch. And it can be smoother if done right. So basically what rev matching is you pull in the clutch, and then as you downshift, you're gonna give it a little, while the clutch is pulled in, blip the throttle. You're getting the revs of your engine up to where they're going to be when you let out the clutch. And you're doing that quicker than just letting it naturally happen by letting the clutch out. But you don't need to really worry about that. Maybe I'll do a more in-depth video on rev matching. This is just the beginner's guide to get you on the road or going around the parking lot. Alright, so I think that's pretty much it. I don't think I'm really missing anything. We covered controls, we covered getting comfortable with the weight of the bike, we covered the friction zone and starting and stopping, we covered progressive braking, we dabbled into counter steering a little bit, and shifting gears. So if this helped, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Please leave a like on the video and subscribe. I'm going to be doing more videos and tutorials. So stay tuned. I'll catch you guys on the next one.